Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in this particular timeline. Welcome to Transdimensional Realities, where we delve into the stranger aspects of high strangeness in our current reality. I'm your host, Milyssa Lee, and I'm really looking forward to this show tonight. We've got a great guest who also happens to be the station manager here at Paranormal UK Radio Network. Tonight, we're talking with Andy Mercer. And Andy, who's been with us for a very long time, he's been a guest on several of our programs, and he specializes in the occult. And so we're going to be really delving deep into some strange aspects of things that a lot of people don't know about, but yet I feel are very important. So please welcome Andy Mercer to the program. Hi, Andy.
Yeah, it's great to be here. It's your new show, of course. I've put it up a few times on the site, and I must admit I need to listen to more of it. It's been what I've heard so far. It's been really good fun. So it's good to hear a
It's
new show
been
coming.
Yeah, it's been really good. If you listen to the last show I did with Tim Malone, I mean, that one was a really interesting conversation about past lives. And he had a very interesting take on it. It wasn't like the usual that I've done. So, yeah, if anybody who hasn't listened to that one yet, go and pull it up and listen to it, both on the Paranormal UK Radio Network website or on podcasts, wherever, whatever major podcasts are out there, we are there.
I've
So,
done our YouTube channel, and I will add it onto the YouTube channel soon as well. I like to give it a bit of space and time, but on the other platforms
okay,
first, so it gets it's a good area before it goes up on the YouTube net and
sure.
channel. But all got there, so definitely.
Okay. So anyway, you have, we've been working together for God, how many years now? It's been quite a long time.
A while. Funny enough, Steve Ward and I and Susie Vesta recorded the 7th anniversary show of our High Strangers Factor at the weekend. So that'll be going up on fairly soon as well. But I edit it all together. And that was 7 years of that. So it's been at least longer than that, obviously, we've known each other. So it's absolutely flown by. I was thinking about it the weekend. We've talked with Steve about that. Just remembering it was God, it must have been like 2016, 15, 14, somewhere around there. I think it must have started when I had trained to be a school teacher, if you remember. I taught for
Hmm.
a little while and left because just a dire circumstances, not very good school I was at. It's a long story. I won't go into all of it, but I think we started chatting just after that, and it was which is around sort of 14, I think 2014, 15. So yeah, it's been
Right.
probably like 10 years.
And of
Yeah,
course, I had the pleasure of coming out there and meeting you and your wife a couple years ago. So,
yeah, had a wonderful time in Bath, and a lovely city, which I was in again fairly recently, and then wanted to have a nice walk around the cathedral, which is fantastic there. And I found, unfortunately, it was closed for the day because all the
mm.
university graduation ceremonies, which is very annoying because it's a lovely cathedral.
I hate
But
it when that happens. So anyway, you, as I introduced you, you have been researching and involved with the occult for many
mhm.
years, and I was wondering if you could explain to those people in the audience who may not totally understand what that means, or maybe they have some preconceptions of what the occult stands for.
Well, people certainly do have all sorts of preconceived notions of what it actually means. The term itself just means hidden, secret information. And the idea is to bring that information into the light. My particular area of interest is what's known as ceremonial magic, which is often called high magic, which involves things like magic of Solomon and ancient Jewish texts and that sort of thing. It's working with angels and spirits, but on the other side, of course, is working with demons as well, from sort of various denizens of hell and the like. So that's my area of interest, particularly with old grimoire magic, which goes back to sort of 15, 1600s, actually finding, and in my case, in my own research, is often transcribing handwritten documents into typed form, which I then am actually publishing as a publisher. But my interest really is in that understanding of knowledge, the gnosis, if you like, is the term that's often used. If you think of religion as being faith and belief about God and what have you, and that's sort of precludes the idea of knowledge of these things, that the idea of knowing about these things is you shouldn't be doing that. You should have faith and belief and recognize the mystery of whatever. This is more about understanding what these things are, what power is supposed to exist, what you can do with it. I'm very kind of vague. It's such a broad topic to kind of give a fairly concise answer to, but it's generally the idea of what is there that's beyond the physical realm, what energies exist, what forces exist. Are there literal angels and literal demons? Do they really exist? Are they mental constructs, or there's something between the two? That's been my kind of area of interest. I've worked with, say, what's called ceremonial magic and goetic magic, which is,
Hmm.
say, things like the Key of Solomon, etc. But one of my big areas of interest is a guy called Dr. John Dee, who was an Elizabethan astrologer and scientist, mathematician, was a friend of Queen Elizabeth I. And he wanted to, like a lot of occultists, understand more about how the universe worked, how the world worked. But he came to the idea and conclusion that in order to find out more information, you had to talk to God or God's angels directly. And he devised, well, he didn't devise as such as sort of discovered a system of communication using a crystal ball, which is what we call scrying. And he would use a seer who'd look into the crystal ball and describe to Dee what he was seeing, which is Edward Kelly. Kelly would then describe what he was seeing, and Dee would make note of it. And this is called Enochian magic, which is something I found very interesting when I first got interested in the occult way back in the midst of time. So I explored that area specifically, and my interest sort of grew from that point of being interested in one particular form of magic, occult, work into a more broader image idea of all the other forms of occult. But I'm also interested in things like witchcraft, particularly British traditional witchcraft, which is again it's about sort of magical manipulation of the environment around you, which is kind of what the occult is more generally. It's that kind of manipulation of energies, understanding how it's all working. Now, what you decide for yourself about what's really going on, whether angels and demons exist or real beings or not, is kind of up to you. I mean, there's good arguments in both directions. Which is more real? Is it a psychological thing, or is it an energy thing, or are they real beings from other planes? You kind of end up sort of figuring it out for yourself almost. There are people who will tell you most definitely, oh yes, there's a literal heaven, a literal hell. These beings come from there. Others will say, no, this is sort of collective unconscious archetype material that we talk about in psychology. That's really what's going on here. And no one's right, no one's wrong, because you can't prove either way. All you can say is for your own experiences whether anything actually works. If you try using like ritual magic to try and contact beings from other realities, do you find you're actually contacting those things? Do you feel you're experiencing something? And I think those who've been serious practitioners for years will say, yes, there is something. What it is, hard to say, but there is something to it. So it's, in a nutshell, it's really trying to understand the mechanics, if you like, of reality beyond the sort of physical stuff, beyond science. If there's more going on, which, as I say, for me, the conclusion is there is something going on. What exactly is, I don't know. How exactly it works. I wouldn't like to say definitively. I have my own ideas, but I
Hmm.
think it's somewhere between those two ideas of these beings seem to exist, but they're not necessarily independent of us. There's some kind of connection to us as humans, that they exist almost within us as well as beyond us. It's kind of like a middle ground between the two. That's my personal thinking. But as I say, others will tell you completely differently, that these things are real beings. You summon someone from a literal hell, a servant of Satan, if you like. But I wouldn't be so sure myself if that's the case. But as I say, I know people who would tell you that is the case, and I don't say, oh, you're completely wrong, because I don't know. Each would say to the other, we don't really know. We have our beliefs and our ideas and our evidence, but what we actually believe is up to us. But fundamentally, this stuff is about understanding how reality appears to work, trying to understand or at least get a glimpse of the wiring under the ball, as it were, just the sort of the fabric of reality, how it's all actually working. So that was a lot of waffle. Some of that made sense. It's not
Well,
easy.
that's right up my alley because I'm like you. I want to know how things work. I don't go just on belief or faith. Uh, because you know what, I've been wrong enough in my lifetime, and the more I seem to learn, different directions it pulls me. That's why I named the show what it is, Transdimensional Realities. It's looking beyond what we think of as reality and all the other forces that we deal with on a daily basis that most people can't see, they ignore, or they just don't want to believe in. And
Yes.
there are so many different energies and forces that are surrounding us. And I always liken it to like the light spectrum. You know, you look at the whole electromagnetic spectrum, we see this one little sliver, and we have everything going this way into infrared and to ultraviolet. And it's all there, but we can only see this part. And that's how I look at reality.
Absolutely, and that is essentially it. Is there are clearly other levels of existence, other parts of the spectrum, as you put it, that we can see almost by reflection of it. I mean, I find a lot of crossover between the occult stuff and the paranormal, which was another big field of interest investigating the paranormal, the ghosts, etc. I mean, I've come to the conclusion, which may be a little bit controversial, that ghosts, aliens, spirits, demons, they're all the same thing. They're different forms of manifestation of the same fundamental whatever it is. They just take on different forms. One of the things I found quite fascinating with occult-based stuff is that you can work, say, for example, traditional witchcraft, which I've used. You can work with the Enochian system, which I've used. You work with runes, which I've used. All three systems are very different to each other, and yet all three work. Now, there has to be some kind of continuity between the three of them for all three very, very different systems to actually produce results. And I say, my thinking is that you're dealing with an underlying energy level, which you can alter and manipulate according to those patterns that you're using, i.e., if you're using rune magic, for example, or Icelandic stave magic, which is a much more powerful magical system that comes from Iceland, but it's related to runes, but it's slightly different. But I've used that stuff and find it can be effective. I've used, say, Enochian scrying, trying to travel to literally other realms, is how you feel you're going to. You're experiencing beings, creatures, whatever you want to call them, in those other realms when you're working with them. And again, with more traditional ceremonial magic, you're dealing with more traditionally named spirits that you'll find listed for centuries, a list of demons, like Goetia, for example, the beings that Solomon's supposed to have controlled the Testament of Solomon for the 3rd century. You can work with those traditionally named creatures, beings, whatever you want to call them, and they also respond. So the fact you have different systems that are very different to each other, and yet all three seem to work, suggests there's something underneath all that that is what you're actually interacting with. Now, again, some people wouldn't agree with what I'm saying. They would say that they believe witchcraft is the form and that's the power of something. The other stuff is nonsense. Maybe that's how they want to work. But as I say, if you work dedicatedly and authentically with any of those systems, you get results. When I say results, I mean whatever you're trying to create, affect, occurs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things you find is that people sometimes talk about good versus evil, black and white magic, etc., etc. It's a bit of a nonsense because really it is what you do with it, whatever you're trying to achieve with magical systems. You can certainly use stuff to have detrimental effect on other people if you want to, and you can use the same stuff to have positive effect. It depends how you apply it. It's like anything, any kind of weapon, if you like. It depends how you want to make use of it, whether it becomes a negative or a positive thing. It is very much how you apply it. So you get a lot of people say, "Oh, you don't work with goetic demons or evil monsters." Well, it depends. If you approach them with that kind of attitude, that's what you'll experience. If you work more positive and adhere to whatever is required to summon these things, it tend to be quite friendly. They'll be communicative. So it is often more about how you as a person approach these different forms of magic and the occult will give you a different kind of response depending on, say, how you're doing it and who you are as a person as well. That will make a great difference. One of the things that struck me early on working with Enochian is, say, the scrying, where you can bring things to you to communicate with, or you go to their realms, if you like. What I was experiencing when I worked with it was quite different to, say, for example, someone like Aleister Crowley, who's you may well have heard of as well, a notorious magician from the sort of early 1900s. When he worked with Enochian, he had very different visions, experiences to what I was experiencing. So I was a bit thought, that's interesting, it's different. But back in the 90s, in the early days of the internet, I found a guy who was in Denmark who had been working the same system and was reporting back on his own little website his experiences. And I was struck how remarkably similar they were to my own, much closer. And because I'm just an average bod, and so was he, neither of us were Aleister Crowley, so we weren't having the Crowleyan type of experiences. So it seemed to me very much that it does depend on who you are and how you approach ritual magic in terms of how it then works or doesn't work for you. I think if people go with the wrong attitude, they don't get anywhere with it and dismiss it as being nonsense. And often that's what people do. They don't take the time or make the effort to really understand or experience and practice what they're doing. So it's an interesting thing to find stuff that does actually work.
Well, my personal opinion and my experiences are that it doesn't really matter what you're working with. We are the conduits. We are energy, we are spirit inhabiting these meat suits that can interact with these other realms, these other dimensions, and it's all about intent. It doesn't matter what
Mm.
rituals you use, what practices, is if you're putting out the intent. Perfect example, I studied under shamanism about 10 years ago and learning to be a shamanic practitioner and doing healing. And the connections that you make there is they call it journeying. And in a meditative state, through drumming, you enter into these other worlds, whether it's the upper, middle, or lower world, and interact with your animal totems, spirit guides, any other types of realms. And it's very similar to what you're talking about. So I really think a lot of it is defined by our own perceptions, cultural perceptions. And you can use multiple different types of techniques. And as long as you have that intent and putting that energy out there, it will work for you. When you were
Absolutely.
talking about the scrying, it reminds me very much of what Nostradamus did with scrying in the bowl of water and getting his
Yeah,
visions.
that's exactly. It was a particularly popular form of not just divination, as in seeing the future, like Nostradamus, but that spirit communication, but via means of crystal or water or any surface that was reflected. But you're right, as you said, with the shamanism, the idea of the drumming, the chanting takes you into a different mental altered state. And with the Enochian, for example, you say an Enochian chant, it's an Enochian call in the Enochian language to initiate this communication. And so you do the same thing. It's putting you into a particular trance state. The things which you'll know also from the shamanistic work, and I know from Enochian and others, it's not like imagination. There is a clarity and a strength of imagery and vision that is much, much stronger than simply something you're imagining. It's not even like you're just dreaming. It is literally you're awake, but you're aware that you are experiencing something that's extraordinary, non-ordinary. That's the thing. I recently gave a talk at the Glastonbury Occult Conference here in Glastonbury in the UK, talking about working with a book called The Secret Grimoire of Turiel, which is a grimoire that was originally thought to have been a modern fake, but later has been discovered probably in the 1800s. So it's not that old, but it's older than they thought, and certainly based on earlier material. And the second half of my talk, I talked about that particular book and its history, but the second half, I talked about my personal experiences very early on when I first started working with ritual magic and describing how you have to set up a number of items, you have the things you have to burn to incense, and you have to create sigils, which are these sort of symbols which you put onto parchment, and then you try to communicate. You read out an invocation and look for communication. And I noticed in those early days, I didn't know what I was doing because there was nobody else around who knew about this. This is pre-internet days, of course. I was aware of presences around me when I did this. I wasn't seeing beings before me or anything like that, but a very definite sense of energy forms around me, creatures, beings around me. Like, you say you walk into a room with your eyes closed, you can just tell there's someone in the room and you realize there's someone there. That kind of feeling, you just knew there was someone with you. I never communicated, never said very much. I didn't say anything at all, to be honest with you, but just a sense of, you've called me here, I am here. I'm not going to do anything, I'm not going to say anything, but I am here. The only thing I would notice was, funny enough, I mentioned in the conference, that you'd be in that state for a while, mental state, and then you'd say the license to depart, which clears these things out, and you have a sense it was gone. But I used to notice what could only call poltergeist activity in my room afterwards. For a good 2 or 3 days, there'd be little bangs and knocks on the walls, often the outside wall towards the outside walls. It wasn't like the neighbours or parents, their parents at the time, and objects move around my room. Little things just would be gone and come back, and a couple of days later they'd disappear and reappear. in my room in different spots, or things had been moved. When I left in the morning, it was one place, come back after work, and it was somewhere else. So that was my real first experiences of realizing this stuff was doing something. Something really is going on. Now, people will easily say, well, it's just your imagination. You imagine these beings there. But no, there was a definite sense there was really something to it. And that fascinated me for years. I mean, I had my earlier ghost experience, which I've talked about before on your show, I'm sure. Having seen something when I was sort of 10, 11 years old. But this second experience in my early 20s, working with this stuff, was just as powerful, even though I never saw anything. And that's what took me into this interest in this hidden world, if you like, and exploring it further. But certainly, you're absolutely right in saying that if you have an earnest belief in what you're doing, these, whatever they are, will respond to that. Doesn't matter. You can have all the paraphernalia, because some of the ritual stuff you do with ceremonial magic involves an awful lot of stuff, clothing, vestments, particular perfumes you have to have, all sorts of items, swords, daggers, and cups, pendulums, all sorts of things you need to have for these rituals. You can have all that stuff, have like custom made for you at great expense. But if you don't have the belief in what you're doing, if you're just doing it because you think you have to dress this way and you just follow it blindly, you get annoyed because nothing happens. Because you don't have that belief, you have to have that faith. If you've gone and made stuff yourself, bought a wooden sword from a kid's toy shop and just painted that with symbols on it, rather than this big dramatic metal sword you've had to buy from somewhere, that can be just as powerful because you have faith in what you're doing, and it is about that. So I think all these different systems of magic and the occult are different ways of working that work with you as a person. I mean, culturally, obviously, plays a part as well, but you can obviously cultures have different systems of magic, but like ours, for example, we've got several different systems of magic, from witchcraft up to high ceremonial magic. But if you have a faith and you feel a connection with that stuff, then it tends to work, but it takes time and takes effort. Often people aren't prepared to put the work in. And one of the things I've often said about this stuff is it happens too frequently to be coincidence and not enough to be provable. It's that kind of strange middle ground between the two. It's just, there are things that happen. You think, now, this it's not coincidence. This is something going on here, but I can't just make it happen out of the blue. It has to be the right circumstance, the right situation for it
Right
to become
conditions.
effective.
Yeah, it's not
Exactly.
like that's why science is so quick to dismiss it because they can't bring it into a laboratory and run it under a microscope or and say, see, we can prove this exists because it doesn't act that way. These are energies and things working on a different frequency and vibration. So, things that science doesn't understand yet. But ironically, a lot of the Aboriginal native cultures going back hundreds to thousands of years, they knew it. They worked with it all
Mm,
the time. Everything from, in the UK with the Celts and who else was there? You know better than me. Here, Native Americans, Aborigines in Australia, who are like some of the oldest people on Earth, and they've been working with these energies for millennia.
absolutely. So let's go back to what you said before, man, about approval in a laboratory. Of course, the best argument against that is proving love. We all know love exists. We all experience it at some point in our lives, but you can't prove it in a laboratory. And there's no scientific experiment you can carry out to prove the existence of love. You can't prove scientific mechanisms behind falling in love. You talk about brain chemistry changing, of course, but you can't have a room of 50 people, 25 mental rings, for example, and see the criteria you can find for them to fall in love. Like, what do you set? What criteria do you set for them to fall in love? It just doesn't work like that. There are things like this that you can't simply prove or disprove in a laboratory. You have to
Hmm.
be out there experiencing these things. It's the same with the paranormal in it more generally. You and I both know we've had experiences, more than enough experiences over the years that we cannot explain scientifically or rationally to know there's something to it. But as soon as you start saying, oh, it's definitely X, Y, Z reasons these things happen, and I think you're narrowing the playing field completely because we just don't know. And again, sort of 40 years of studying and experiencing this stuff, I know stuff happens because I've seen it, experienced it. But I wouldn't like to give you a theory as to why it happens. I've talked generally about the ideas of these things having no identity and copying what we do, or they work with what we give them. Again, it's only a theory, it's only an idea. I don't know, but it is true that you can't reduce things down to nuts and bolts materialism, which is what modern science tends to do.
Exactly. It reminds me, I don't know if, do you remember the movie Contact with Jodie Foster, Matthew McConaughey back in the 90s? There was that brilliant scene where she's telling him why she doesn't believe in God because she need empirical proof. And he says to her, well, did you love your father? She goes, well, yes. And he goes, prove it. And it goes
Yeah,
right to what you were saying is there are things you can't prove in that manner, things
yeah,
that we can
exactly.
experience, but and a lot of what we can experience, a lot of it happens within. And that's something you can't measure. I've had experiences where I've had downloads. I've had information come to me. I don't ever call myself a psychic, although other people say I am, but I'm not there yet. Uh, but I have information come to me. I do tarot readings for people, and I'm able to, the last couple of times I've been out, it's like I've really been nailing it. And I don't take credit for that. I think it's I'm downloading and whatever's coming through to me. It was funny. I was reading for a couple friend of mine, and I was reading the husband, and the wife was sitting aside, and she had a little bit to drink. So I'm reading and I'm saying stuff, and she's going, "Oh, oh yeah, oh," and I finally told her, "Shut up." Sit over there. And then I had to close my eyes so I wouldn't look at her because I didn't want to get those visual cues from her. And I finished the
Absolutely.
reading and they told me I nailed it. So again, yeah, it's with a lot of psychics or so-called psychics, you deal with people, in my opinion, who maybe have some things that they're able to tune into, but in a lot of cases, unfortunately, many of them are nowhere near as good as they think they are. I
Yeah.
don't call anybody an outright charlatan, but I have experienced psychics who just, they'll hold the open forums and start throwing things out there, doing cold readings, and it's just ridiculous. And yeah, I see somebody who has a problem with their left knee. Well, that's half the audience,
Yes.
especially if they're our age. So
Exactly.
yeah, it's you have to go within. Everything comes from within. You were mentioning traveling to or interacting with these different realms. Some could call that like astral traveling. You're traveling
Yeah.
outside of your body, but also outside of our reality into these different realms. There's a lot of different ways to connect.
So, I mean, another interesting one bit beyond this, it's kind of connected, is in sort of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and I'm quite interested in figuring out if possible to travel faster than the speed of light, which at seemed impossible. But one of the theories that is out there about how the universe fundamentally works is cosmic strings. And these
Hmm.
are almost realities in themselves, individual tiny realities. Now, if they're non-spatially located, then it's possible that some of the things you're experiencing are within those microcosmic realms. Then you literally going inside these little micro realms, and there is an entire reality in there that's not working at our dimensions. It's even though it's incredibly small, it still operates as if it's three-dimensional within it.
Hmm.
And there's possibilities that there is, if the universe is what I forget the term now, but it's not static and fixed. I don't mean in terms of expanding, but it's the universe exists as a result of something deeper within it. It's I forget the term now. It's annoying. It's just gone from my head. Emergent, I think it's called, where the reality itself that we experience now is a byproduct of something deeper. If that's the case, which more and more cosmologists are starting to think there is something to this, then it starts to really open up the possibility that these realms do exist and there are things, beings that are non corporeal, non spatial, that can occupy those realms. And that may be what we're communicating with. Again, it's kind of just a vague theory that I'm trying to sort of throw together, but it's intrigued me, that whole notion of there could be this realm and it does actually exist. It's not something that we can literally physically visit, but we can access into. psychologically, mentally, very possibly. And that to me is fantastic.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of what people consider to be ghosts or cryptids or other types of beings are these entities that, inhabit these other realms. They can come over onto our side. And there's a great example that's very popular right now is over here in the US, there's what they call the Appalachian Mountains, which
Mhm.
is one of the oldest mountain ranges in the world. It stretches from the Kentucky, Tennessee area and goes all the way up over the globe and actually is into Scotland. It was all one big mountain range, and some of it sunk over time, but uh, very, very old, connected. And people have so many experiences in these areas that you can't say it's haunted. It's high strangeness to the extreme. I mean, it's one thing people have seen Bigfoot. Okay, that's popular. But they also see like this white, like rake, what the rake they call it, kind of creature. Um, excuse me, allergies. They hear voices. They things knock on their doors at night. Voices asking to let in mimics, and it's all concentrated in this one area along this mountain range. And there are rules for people living in Appalachia. They're unwritten rules, but it's like you close all your blinds at night, you lock your doors. You don't go out in the woods at night, especially alone. If you hear whistling, you ignore it. Do not whistle back. If you hear somebody calling your name, no, you didn't. If you hear some strange creature scream, no, you didn't. And those are their rules to to keep people safe. And a lot of it sounds like superstition, but there's so much happening in that area. And I feel that we have those types of hotspots all over the world where these dimensions, that veil is thin and creatures, entities, whatever, bleed over into our dimension.
Absolutely. I can think of a few places, obviously, over here as well. That's definitely the case. One of which I am going back to for the first time in nearly 20 years at the end of March, a place called
Oh,
Woodchester Mansion, which I may have
okay,
mentioned before.
okay.
And there was a regular there back in the early 2000s. I was working with a company called Fright Nights, having paranormal investigation nights there. And I hadn't been for absolutely years, but there's a group I'm now involved in that's going there at the end of the month, which I'm really looking forward to, because that is a very strange place where you do have all sorts of phenomena. I mean, I've literally lost count the number of investigations I've been on there. I mean, it was every weekend night for about a year when I was working for Fright Night, so it was 100 plus, and we always had something happen. Definitely something. So, I mean, it's the valley the place is built in. It's called Nymphsfield, Field of Nymphs. So the fairy nymphs. So there's a history of strangeness in this particular valley where the Woodchester Mansion sits. So that's definitely that kind of place. But I've just read a lot about the Appalachian Mountains. I'd love to visit one of these days because I can imagine it'd be amazing. But it does seem to be there are these places where there's a geological a fault line or a geological effect that seems to be part of this strange manifestation of energies that seem to occur at these particular spots and places in the world. That is quite fascinating.
I would be interested in doing an investigation out there because, if there are certain energies, maybe it's electromagnetic, maybe it can be measured. Again, this doesn't happen all the time. It's not like you can set your clock by it. A lot of people have experiences, and maybe there are hot spots. It's a matter of talking to the right people and going out. There's lots of videos on the internet, but of course, a lot of them are also fake too. But there's some really interesting ones that I know are not CGI or AI that have people interacting with things that are, I'm sorry, scary as hell. And I don't get scared easily, so I would really like to go and investigate along that area sometime. I mean, we do have a part of the Appalachian Mountains, the Appalachian Trail coming right here where I live in New Jersey, but most of it seems to happen down in Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, and around those areas.
Of course, it's West Virginia, so where our mutual friend Steve Ward now lives, of course, right in the Mothman Prophecies area in Point Pleasant.
And that
Another
could be part of it too. Point
Yeah,
Pleasant, West
same.
Virginia, but it's also been seen all over the area, which is, of course, part of Appalachia.
Absolutely. So it is interesting when you can map this phenomena when you can link it to particular fault lines. And I say fault lines, I mean energy fault lines as well. Plus, we have a lot of ley lines in the UK, which is a matter of debate whether they're genuinely some kind of energy field or it's more just old tracking people want. But the strongest one here, which again had a lot of strange things occur on, is the St. Michael line, which I discovered fairly recently runs through my village. So I was quite, oh,
Nice.
that's interesting. Realise that sort of Glastonbury Tor is another part of that. People might have heard of Glastonbury before; it's pretty famous. So we have those sort of energy lines as well. So it's operating in a similar kind of manner. As I say, this goes diagonally across the country, and there's another one that comes north to south across the country, as in the main two ley lines of energy that people do report phenomena along those particular lines. And it is fascinating to think that there is definitely a kind of a flow of energy that kind of moves almost around the world. I think, as you said, the Appalachians reach across to Scotland, those sort of mountain lines there. So it is interesting, this kind of network. Can you get these places of high strangers, as we like to call them? I mean, I've been watching or re-watching. Again, I know it's TV, but the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch I find absolutely fascinating because you're talking about hard scientists investigating strange phenomena that seems to be building a picture of something very odd in that particular area that is genuinely occurring, and it's been measured as an odd phenomenon that seems to affect electronics and electrical things as well. And I find that absolutely fascinating.
This,
This kind of
that's
idea.
literally my favorite show. And
Yeah.
what I like about the show is the fact that they refuse to jump to any conclusions. They're out trying to measure and get facts, and they come across all this strange phenomenon and they can't explain it. And they
Yeah.
try everything, all these different experiments. But yet, when you get a ball of light, the UAPs that they call them, ball of light flying over the mesa, dives into the mesa, disappears, and then a few moments later appears out of the mesa from a different angle, but along the same flight trajectory. It's something is moving through solid matter. And the fact that in the later seasons, there seems to be some kind of energy force field dome above
Yes.
the one section of the ranch that they're able to measure, but yet they have no idea what it is.
Absolutely. I mean, you have things like the helicopters being acting as if there's objects underneath them. You know,
Yes.
that's once or twice could be a problem with helicopter, but it's happened repeatedly. It's picking up readings of things that shouldn't be there, that are not there, but yet it's reading as if there's something present. And obviously, you've seen the one with the multiple drone flights, these drones that behave perfectly normally in every other circumstance. And at a certain level, as they rise up, they start moving apart and acting strange. Laser beams being cut in the air,
Mhm.
blocked off. So it doesn't happen, or diffracted by something. It just doesn't happen in normal science, normal physics. These things are clearly occurring. And it is a fascinating program. I say it is TV, so you always have to take it with a pinch of salt. But it seems they are discovering something very strange going on there. And of course, the obvious thing is if it's in one place, Skinwalker Lawns, one other parts of the world. You know, there are other places that are strangely active like this as well. They have to be there.
There was a friend of mine that owned a small ranch in the south of Phoenix, in the southwest of Phoenix, Arizona, called the Stardust Ranch. Um,
Yes, yes.
yeah, I used to know the owner.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, he died a few years ago,
Yeah.
and somebody bought the ranch, and nobody can figure out who it is, which is
Oh,
kind of
right.
which is kind of shady to begin with, especially all of the
Mhm.
intense, rather negative activity that happened in that area. And again, it makes you wonder, is it something in the ground? Or is it
Yeah,
something where certain energies, ley lines, or portals, something that are in this area that is allowing these entities, sometimes they look like aliens, but I'm not quite convinced they're aliens. It's
yeah, yeah.
a lot of really wild stuff. I know one Ghost Adventures of all TV shows went there and did an investigation, and they had some interesting activity happening while they were there. Um, but there's these hot spots all over the planet. I
Yeah.
investigated a cave system in Colorado many years ago, And they let us go all the way back in where they'd rarely take tours. This big open chamber, it's about 250 feet underground, 1,000 feet from the portal to get in. You're in the middle of a mountain. And I had devices that were picking up strange music. We were hearing voices, catching EVP. Nobody ever died in there. The Native Americans never went in there, especially not back that far. And it's a sterile part of the cave. There's no life. I got little lights appearing in cracks in the rocks. They weren't reflection. It was all limestone. Um, we heard growls. We recorded a voice telling us to get out. And that makes me look into it deeper because nobody died in there. So
Yeah.
what is in there? And then you start thinking about the folk tales of, let's say, the Welsh miners and the Tommyknockers that they encountered, people in mines, people in caves, things that seem to exist under the ground.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
so what I feel we were dealing with was not human.
Yeah. 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 I remember another place that I've been to again. We went back recently last year, but I've been in the past, which is the Hellfire Caves over here in High Wycombe.
Yes.
Now, they're limestone caves. They're man-made. They were actually dug out, but they were used by the Hellfire Club. Now, Hellfire Club is interesting because it has a reputation of being sort of dark and sinister, but they were kind of just a lot of very rich people having a very good time, should we say?
Yeah.
May have
Debauchery
carried out
mostly.
Yes, basically, yes. We may have carried out some rituals, but they were like a mockery of ritual. They weren't genuine, serious ritual work. But of course, if you might be mimicking something more serious, and you're raising energy levels by this partying, and we've been in about 4 or 5 times investigations there, and there's always been odd noises and stuff. Things have occurred, but there was one particular investigation we had there. Again, this is back in the early 2000s, where we had a group of 25 people with us, and by the end of the night, we had about five of us, five patients left had been spooked by it. We had the most striking thing was the noises we heard. It was the only way I can describe it is like having someone moving heavy furniture around in the next room, except there's no furniture down there. There's a series of chambers, but there's no furniture. There's nothing physical that could have made those noises. Yet we all heard them. And at one point, in one part in a corridor, again in the dark, a mist appeared about knee level and down, just appeared from nowhere. And within 2 or 3 minutes, had gone again, but it was certainly there. But people felt sick, felt dizzy. I had to physically carry one woman out, and it's quite a trek to carry this poor woman out the whole bloody cave network. So it was, and it was seasoned people. So some they've been on lots of investigations with us, and they just couldn't handle it. They felt sick, they felt rough, they felt tired. I mean, really tired, emotionally tired, not just
Mhm.
had enough sleep. And so we're obviously being very negatively affected by this network. It was amazing. But one of the things that really stood out was one of the people in the group had a bat detector, which there are bats that live in the caves, and it would make noise as a bat went past. When we got down to the inner sanctum, the very deepest, which is a good 300 or 400 feet underground, both vertically and into about half a mile, it started making a whining noise, and it was almost like it was singing like discordantly, going up and down. It's like, what on earth is that? He said the only thing that can make that kind of noise is very heavy machinery vibrating at very, very high frequency. I mean, very high, ultrasonic frequencies. Nothing else can generate that noise. But there's nothing down here that could possibly be created that sound. He said this device isn't faulty. It's worked perfectly fine the rest of the evening. Checked before it came out. Batteries are fine. And when we left the inner sanctum, we went back to normal. There's an odd click as a bat went past. But just in that inner sanctum was this bizarre noise it was making. So the only thing he knew that would create that noise is heavy machinery at very high frequency. That was just a
Hmm.
complete mystery. So there was clearly something down there, energy waves of some kind, of literal waves that was picking up on. What they were,
Well,
where they came from, no one knows.
well, I've heard other stories. I mean, with people getting sick in these situations, it's similar to other totally unrelated type of phenomenon, but um, it's like whatever energy is there or vibrations that it's causing. I know people can be affected by high levels of EMF, electromagnetic fields. They can also be affected by infrasound. And I
Yeah.
know in a lot of cryptid cases over here, especially dealing with Sasquatch, Bigfoot, where people will get disoriented and sick and whatnot, and they researchers have theorized that it's able to use infrasound, which we can't audibly hear, but it affects the body and can cause the sickness, uh, the feelings of being watched, the tiredness. So it wouldn't surprise me if something in there is using some form of either, infrasound or other types of manipulated energy to try to get people to leave because it doesn't want
Yes.
you there.
Well, interestingly, also on the same investigation different investigation, the one I had last year, one thing I'm quite good at is I can kind of channel things, I suppose is the best way to put it. I can sense that there's someone or something around, and if they're speaking, now don't be speaking to me, but if they communicate, I can usually just say back what is being said. And
Hmm.
I was in one cave, and the people nearby were asking questions on the Ouija board, and I was given the answers before they appeared on the board. It was literally, I can hear this person saying these things, and then the board would give the same answer. Now, there was several people around the board, so it wasn't like one person just pushing it around, just repeat what I was saying. It was literally, I could hear this man was talking. He wasn't very happy about us being there, and something had happened to someone down there. I think
Hmm.
we're going too much. Young women had been taken down that they'd had fun with them, shall we say, and they'd been obviously let go of afterwards. And
Right.
the impression was they'd been paid. It wasn't like they were just sort of abducted and taken down. They weren't very happy with it, or some of the members weren't very happy with what was going on. And this person was relaying some of that back. But to say the weird thing was, they were saying things to me, and I was repeating it, and it was appearing on the board as I was saying it. So there was something was definitely present and communicating, and was unhappy. So that it could account for some of the stranger feelings you were having because it was unpleasant things going on that was creating negative energy around us,
Hmm.
quite possibly.
I've been in paranormal investigations where I felt whatever was there was trying to get me to leave and was focusing its energy on me, and I was having what I can only describe as an anxiety attack. My heart was racing. Almost felt like it was palpitating. I just felt totally anxious, and I would have to leave. The first time it happened to me, I was in a house. It hit when I was upstairs, and I had to leave and go outside. And the second I stepped outside, I was fine. So then I came back in and it hit me again. But by that point, I knew what was going on and I wouldn't let it get to me. So
Yeah, yeah.
a lot of people, you see these TV shows, they start feeling something and they're screaming and they're running out and doing everything you're not supposed to do. But I've had that happen a few times where something obviously didn't want me there and was using what methods it could, energy wise, to push me out and get me to leave.
I think, as you said earlier on, talk about EM fields here. They're generating a field which is then interacting with us uncomfortably. As our bodies vibrate. Our heart particularly produces an EM field of its own. It's about 20 feet wide. It's quite big, lower frequency, but it is quite big. And anything interacts with it. This is a theory, but anything gets within that field and affects the field, you feel it. You have a bodily reaction, and the way our brains are wired is that any kind of adverse bodily reaction will cause a panic because it's making us then want to get away from wherever it is. It triggers the fight or flight. You get a sense of something's not safe or uncomfortable. You want to get out of there. It's biological, evolutionary from the threat of wild animals attacking us. Of course, you get a sense there's a noise nearby that could be a potential threat, so we need the energy to run off or fight it off. But there could be things, waves of energy that trigger off the fight or flight response, the anxiety you mentioned, because it's disrupting our own EM field that we generate. So we have a reaction to that. I mean, it's partly scientific stuff, talk about the effect of infrasound. It's along those similar lines, but it could well be possible that whatever you're dealing with or interacting with is creating a adverse rhythm, if you like, that your body then picks up and feels uncomfortable and wants to get away from.
Well, when you mentioned that the body produces this electromagnetic field around itself or this energy field around itself, could that be considered a person's aura?
You could look at it in that respect. Yeah, it's possible that you would have an effect upon light because it's all part of the same spectrum of field of energy anyway. So yeah, it's very possible that's what people then pick up upon.
Hmm.
Have a vision. I mean, do talk about auras as being colors they can see, but others talk about being a feeling, an impression they're getting from that person, which they then interpret as a color, but it's a way of explaining the feeling they're picking up on. Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Over here in the States, I don't know how it is there. There's a lot of people, mostly women, who are really into what they consider Wicca, witchcraft, and a lot of it, I think that they people are playing around with something they don't really fully understand. I mean, I know there are
Mm.
some people I've met who are witches who have been into it for years and they have a better understanding of it, but a lot of especially younger people will read some books or watch some programs or whatever, and then they start doing these rituals, which is, it's like somebody who's never used a Ouija board before using it. Not a good idea if you don't know how to control the session and close it, which is the one thing that's very important. People, when they start messing around with these energies, they don't know how to shut it down, close it off, and protect themselves. And it's like the people who use a Ouija board who play with it and suddenly they get scared and they just walk away. It's like you opened your front door and left it wide open. There's somebody bad there you don't like, but you just walk away and leave the door open. They just walk right on through and can cause all sorts of trouble.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting because one thing I would sort of differentiate between Wicca and witchcraft, Wicca has become a religion.
Hmm.
It tends to be, I mean, it is literally referred to as religion in this country now because enough people say they adhere to it that it registered on the last census as being an actual religion. It's the only religion the UK has ever given the world. And it is being followed a little dogmatically by some people that this is the only way of doing things. The Wiccan way of magic, if you like, is the only way that they can do, which again isn't quite true. I mean, Gerald Gardner created it really. I mean, he says he's part of a covenant, but there's not a lot of real evidence for that covenant actually existing. Much of it, I think, is his own early experience. I think that the Golden Dawn was involved, in other
Hmm.
smaller groups, and synthesized out of that the Wiccan movement was created. I mean, it's sort of like a gateway drug, if you like, into the occult. People experiencing Wicca, and if you stick to strictly what is in the Wiccan code, it's very safe stuff. It's very kind of or basic level stuff. But if you want to go further and deeper along that kind of lines or currents, we tend to call it, then you go into more traditional witchcraft, which is much broader and has a better historical basis in the sense it's traditional practices that are recorded in books like the one I wrote about, the Wiki Show Decay, which is a collection of spells from the Victorian age. There's no organized witchcraft. There's no witch covens or anything like that in the Victorian times and earlier. That's a myth. That was something that a woman called Professor Margaret Murray created in her book, which she wrote about 1910, but the witch cult of Western Europe, which suggested there was a long lineage of witch cult activity in covens, and it is nonsense. It really is. There's no relevance for it at all. But individual practitioners of witchcraft have been around for centuries. They tend to be like the wise woman of the village, and the stuff they use is more real, if you like. It's not
Hmm.
synthesized. Like the Wiccan stuff is not, you know, I'm trying to avoid the word made up, but you get what I'm saying. It's been put together by the bits and pieces of more traditional herbal magic that's been around for centuries. And that, if you don't know what you're doing with that, you can walk a dangerous path because it is stuff that is working with real energies that you could not necessarily understand how to control, how to work with. I mean, the Ouija board is an interesting case in point because it's again, that's interpretation because, of course, before the Exorcist movie, a Ouija board was seen as not particularly dangerous. In fact, you could buy it as like a kid's toy. It's the view of it was changed by the Exorcist. It made it appear to be much more dangerous. But it's now in the public psyche, the public consciousness, that it is a way of opening doors to darker energies, shall we say. So, of course, there becomes a possibility of these things, as we were saying earlier, perform it in accordance with your belief system. If you think you're working with dark system stuff through a Ouija board, then that's what you're going to experience. These things are going to manifest in those forms. And if you aren't doing it safely, I mean, we always talk about license to depart in magic, the idea of dispelling the energy that's built up around you. It is important to do that because it will, as you say, it'll cause a problem. Leaving the front door open. It's like you're setting a fire to something and then just leaving the fire to burn by itself, and then being surprised your house burns down because you left the fire burning by itself. You need to power it down, which is our sort of quasi-scientific term. You want to try and bring the energy levels back down to sort of safe and normal. And if you don't do that, you're going to experience something happening to you, whether it's psychological because you've left it open or you've left your mind open, or it's something more powerful, you could argue. But there is an effect. That's the thing. The cause is one thing. The effect that you're experiencing post working and not close things down, close yourself down properly, is real. You do experience stuff that you don't particularly want to experience.
Very true. But we're coming up on the end here. Now, do you have any projects or anything that's coming up that you want to promote?
I would like to just mention that, as I do on my shows up here, I run Ninth Circle Press, publishing company that publishes esoteric and occult books. My last title sold out in 48 hours, which I was rather pleased with. I printed far too few. I'm going to be doing a second edition of that later on. That was an ancient Greek magic. I'm currently working on a book based around a manuscript from the Victorian age written by a chap called Frederick Hockley, which I'm transcribing from his rather beautiful but not incredibly easy to read handwriting into modern English, which I should be publishing the next month or so. And that's the next one I shall be releasing. But yeah, so
Fantastic.
that's what I do. Full-time writer and publisher.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for coming on. It's been awesome talking to you, and it's been way too long. So we're going to have to do this again.
Definitely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, thank you again, and talk to you soon.
You too.
And that was Andy Mercer, who's an expert in the occult and is also the station manager here at the Paranormal UK Radio Network and is involved with a few of our other shows as well. Andy, again, is a longtime friend and is really great to talk to him one-on-one again like this. So we had already discussed, we're going to have him back in the future. We're going to nail down the topic of what we want to talk about because we did a very broad discussion tonight. So we'll pick something and go more in depth next time. So until next week, you all have a great week and upcoming weekend. Spring is on the way. And be good humans. We'll catch you later.